So what I like about blockchain and supply chain is that it's one of the most obvious, common sense, legitimate reasons to use blockchain, and it actually has started being used in real time. And so let's begin. We're also going to be having a video to see an actual blockchain working in supply chain. So let's start with a video.
How do you know that the coffee that you bought is actually fair trade? How do you know which one is real? How do you know that this t-shirt has not been made in a sweatshop with a simple tag added at the end? You simply don't. In order for you to be certain, you would need a record of all transactions and events of the life of an item. That would be possible with blockchain. What's a blockchain? That's a fancy word. Blockchain is related to Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency. Initially, it was made for financial transactions, but it is now revolutionizing the business world, especially supply chain. It's just like Google Sheets. With regular transactions, there is a middleman like the bank that registers this transaction, a centralized system like Microsoft Word. But with Bitcoin, transactions are between user to user. So when there's a transaction, the information is recorded in a shared ledger or block, and these blocks are linked together to form a blockchain, like a shared Google Doc. Transaction accuracy is driven by the fact that consensus creates truth. In a blockchain database, every participant or node maintains a copy of the shared ledger. Each transaction on the blockchain is recorded in computer code showing who the parties are, transaction details, and timestamp with each containing the unique math-based encrypted signature. This digital signature is key as it allows each block of information to be securely connected to all the rest. It's this system of full transparency and connectedness that lends the blockchain its trust and credibility. This connection provides an audit trail of every transaction that's ever occurred in a system. So, if there were an unauthorized change, each node is notified and we can see where it took place. They then would agree to recognize the change as valid or rejected. Again, transparency and consensus combine to make the blockchain system virtually tamper-proof. Today, your data is stored in silos, just like a Microsoft Word file. When blockchain, your data will be stored publicly or pseudo-anonymously in a shared database. Now with blockchain, you can track the chronological history of the organic cotton shirt that you bought. You cannot tamper or cheat because everyone using the system is watching you. The blockchain revolution isn't going to happen overnight, but it is expected to change our lives like the wheel did, or the electric motor and the internet itself. I believe that this blockchain would be the next industrial revolution.
Okay, so there's basically 6 compelling reasons to use blockchain in the supply chain space. The first one is you can reduce or eliminate fraud and errors by having everyone seeing all the paperwork at the same time as it's happening. The second one is you can improve inventory management. So when you put it in an order, you can realize, oh, I'm trying to order something and they don't have any. So basically, again, the transparency is going to allow you to get a better handle on your inventory management. You can minimize courier costs by using this. You can also reduce delays from paperwork. I'm actually going to show you an example in shipping where basically the paperwork is an absolute mountain when you're shipping with overseas. You can identify issues faster. This can really be very helpful as far as preventing problems as well as preventing lawsuits by being aware of what's happening and everyone basically seeing all the facts as opposed to he said, she said, oh, well, trust me, this is what I think happened. So by being able to identify the issues faster can actually prevent some litigation issues. And you can increase consumer and partner trust. So if you're importer, exporter, the whole language barrier and someone being on the other end of the earth, that can all get minimized by being able to see everything as it's happening in real time. So the best way to illustrate this is to show you a paper trail of a shipping container. So we're going to do, basically, we're going to be shipping some flowers tonight. So right now, ocean freight basically takes care of 90% of goods in global trade. Right now, it costs twice as much to track a shipping container as it does to actually ship the container itself, because all the information currently is in silos. So for example, let's just take a look at the flower industry. It's about $105 billion trade industry globally. About 700,000 metric tons of flowers are shipped each year. This is from the grower to the retailer. Now, one shipment could require 30 organizations and 200 communications. And all the while this is happening, the flowers are wilting. Now, one lost form, a late approval, someone didn't get what they needed, and your container can be stuck in port, miss the ship, and then this perishable good may become worthless. So the entire process can actually take a month to do this. So it's really timely when you're doing something perishable such as flowers. Now, if you digitized the shipment of flowers, you get three advantages. You can trace it in real time. You get transparency. You can see all the information as it's happening. Everyone has the same information at the same time, and you get increased security. So now, let's get our shipment ready. So we're going to pack up some flowers for an international shipment, and we're going to put that purchase order onto the blockchain. And everyone's going to be able to see it through a permission blockchain. So while the flowers are actually on the way to the port, any officials can be approving paperwork to have it clear customs. The blockchain can confirm the transactions that, yes, the powers that be actually did sign off on this. Once this happens, a smart contract can get executed. So for example, if I'm in the United States and I'm trying to ship flowers to Kevin in Canada as a congratulations on his new puppy, once I send that and we see that the flowers have cleared customs, I get the confidence that, okay, the flowers are out of my hands. I've done what I'm supposed to do. Kevin can send me a deposit for 25% as good faith to say, okay, Michael did his end of it, so here's some money. And so the smart contract can execute this as it goes along, and then the shipment can get released. So the smart contract can actually dribble out the money as the shipment goes through. My next payment could come out when I clear customs in Canada, and then the final payment could be when Kevin actually picks it up from the port, and I can be paid before he even leaves the port. So once we get to we get the paperwork done, the container gets loaded on the ship. So as it's going, everyone's going to be seeing everything through the supply chain as it goes along. It's very similar to shipping your shipment through Amazon. And everyone has a little bit of trust and calm, so they're not doing all the emails saying, oh, where's the ship? And you can actually have a beacon on the ship and see it traveling through the ocean. So a few more advantages to using blockchain for supply chain is that delays can be reduced because you can see bottlenecks as they're occurring. You can have some cost savings in here because you're not spending so much time sending emails, doing phone calls, trying to track it, and you can have more secure transparency. Also, you can have things with the smart contract that would say, let's say that the beacon stops on the ship and the ship sinks. Well, the smart contract could be programmed to file a claim with the insurance company right away instead of waiting. If we didn't have all this transparency of information, what could happen is I say to Kevin, oh, I shipped it, and Kevin says, well, I never got it. Well, wait a minute, I don't know if that's the truth. You're trying not to pay for it, and neither Kevin or I know that the ship sank. So by having all this transparency, we can execute and get things done faster, basically. So as far as the impact that we could have, you could increase world GDP by 5% and increase the trading volume by 15% because things are going to be shipping faster with less bottlenecks, less things sitting on the port waiting for a piece of paper to get approved. So again, to review, the 6 advantages: you can reduce your fraud and errors, improve your inventory management, minimize courier costs, reduce delays from paperwork, reduce waste, and take care of issues faster as they're occurring instead of waiting for things to blow up and then trying to mop them up. So here's another video which is going to show you what an actual supply chain blockchain piece of software looks like.
Hello everybody. Today we're going to show you the blockchain supply chain visibility demo. Lack of well-connected information to business transactions, such as sales orders and shipment status, forces supply chain logistics to operate on incomplete information. End-to-end supply chain visibility, if achieved, will enable retailers and suppliers to anticipate and manage the flow of goods more effectively. Using blockchain as a shadow ledger, information can be securely stored and selectively shared. Existing systems can continue to run without changes while information flows into blockchain. We use smart contract to further enhance the information. It processes data and events as they come in to update the status of purchase orders and shipments, giving the users a full picture of the life cycle of each purchase order and each shipment. One can imagine with such a rich base of information, advanced analytics can take advantage of this type of data. This can further provide predictive and learning abilities to the supply chain visibility platform. In this demo, the purchase order and shipment statuses are compiled into perspectives for retailers, buyers, and suppliers. On this screen, you can imagine a buyer who is monitoring shipment to different distribution centers in a day. As you can see today, it is showing the total of 22 shipments, with 2 shipments already delivered on time and 1 late. Checking further, you can see the information from the retailer's purchase order is showing that this shipment is expected on July 3rd, but it was actually delivered yesterday, July 4th. Here's another example. The system can tell that 3 trucks now are on site currently. And here's another example for the 16 shipments that are in transit. Their last locations are updated periodically by the transportation partner, so the buyer can move the mouse around to check the locations where the trucks were last reported. These various calculations are possible as we collect detailed events on blockchain, such as when pickup and drop-off appointments were made, truck arrival and departure times, and periodic truck locations while they are in transit. In addition to location and time, the information from shipments and purchase orders also gives us details what each shipment carries. In some cases, a shipment may contain even more than 1 purchase order, and this is the place where it would be seen if that's such the case. You can also inspect each shipment visually by looking at the map of where the pickup was made and where it is heading. This is to get the sense of how far the truck is from the destination. The dashboard view allows the deliveries to be viewed by locations. Locations of shipments which have yet to arrive can be seen and can be inspected further of their pickup origins and their whereabouts and so forth. Lastly, the pickup view provides a perspective of a supplier who could be monitoring and making sure that goods flow to retailers as they planned it. The supplier can monitor shipments, making sure they pick up on time, and continue to monitor them as they leave warehouses and make decisions if they fall behind. In this demo, we have shown how blockchain can be used as a single source of truth. Suppliers and retailers now can have a shared view of sale orders and shipments. The single source of truth eliminates discrepancies between separate recordings by retailers and suppliers the way it is done today. It eliminates the conflict when these recordings do not align. Smart contract enables the user of blockchain to have a comprehensive shared view of their orders and shipment status. The user experience that you see here takes advantage of this rich information base and is enabled to tailor views that can better serve both suppliers and retailers' perspectives. In the future, advanced analytics will be built to take advantage of this type of information to provide users with actionable insights. Thank you so much for viewing.
Okay, so now Prakash has a question or a comment. Hello, Prakash.
Yeah, Michael. I mean, this stage of the course, having taken so many classes, maybe this is not appropriate to us, but I understand the benefits of blockchain, but most of what was covered in this last video could be done by FedEx also. And I mean, I heard from FedEx CEO multiple times that people trust FedEx and trust is their business. So they are in the business because of the trust. So it sounds like expanding FedEx business model to other elements could solve the purpose, but I know there are certain elements like distributor ledger, smart contracts that could be helpful, but why doesn't using FedEx solution or expanding FedEx business model help? Why is it so different when compared to the existing FedEx business model?
Well, the one thing that she didn't mention that I did like in the last video I showed last lecture was where IBM had taken real-time weather data and delayed data, and then you could see real time, okay, if I'm going to be shipping with IBM on their blockchain, I'm going to have a much better sense of when my stuff is going to arrive because they're going to be taking a look at real-time data on all these trucks in the network and how they're doing. And basically it's adding on the real-time data as well as like weather, accidents, that kind of thing that she didn't mention in this. But I think that's where you can start to get some value. But I agree with you. I think Benedict said that he had seen software like this like 10 years ago.
Yeah. So Prakash, I think the other issue is the cost. And so one of the fundamental value propositions of blockchain is it reduces cost, right? So you're right. And so the point, I guess the point that's implicit in your question is, where's the return on investment, the ROI, on the blockchain solution compared to FedEx? And I think that is an excellent consideration for all the things that we're talking about here, because frankly, where we are in the journey of blockchain is we're at the pilot stage in many instances, except perhaps in fintech, which has moved a little bit beyond that. So the proof points that identify how much the cost difference is, and I would agree with you. I would take FedEx in a heartbeat if the costs were comparable. But if you can take 20, 30, 40% out of the cost or more, right, then that gives you a huge dilemma because now you have to choose between a known trusted provider and of services and a less known or less known and trusted solution, but it may have a huge cost advantage.
Now, if you are an independent trucker or you have a small trucking firm, let's say you have 3 trucks, you could get some advantage by putting this onto a blockchain and you're not going to be using FedEx because you're competing with them. So that would be something where a small person could get a bump up. And I saw Paul wanted to say something, then Benedict, then Sandeep. Paul?
No, Benedict, go ahead. I just had another perspective, so go ahead.
Benedict, you're on the air.
I think the example I was talking about, it turns out that the braking behavior of truck drivers actually contributes to the delay. And that's the work we did 10 years ago for a company in Canada. So that's just advanced analytics, it's data analytics, but it has nothing to do with trust. I think where it comes in supply chain is really, I trust UPS to deliver me the goods, right? And it's ensured if they don't do it, that's all good. The good itself, however, if that's real, let's say I order a watch, an expensive watch, and that gets delivered, I want to verify if that watch is really a watch from the brand that I bought it from and not a fake one. That's where trust comes in. And that, in my opinion, in supply chain, except in the operational efficiency stuff that you mentioned at the beginning, in my opinion, that's the only part where trust actually drives supply chain and nowhere else, in my opinion.
Yeah, Benedict, that's actually called Provence, but maybe Paul wants to speak to that. Maybe that was your idea, Paul.
That's fine. No, that's exactly right. It's the integrity of the supply chain, which is the source. There's a confirmed source that you bought this branded watch and you actually received the branded watch. I think the other part of this is that, years ago, we did data analytics on supply chain, but much of the visibility that we wanted in supply chain actually came from manually entered data, which was always lagged. So what's happening here is we now have more standardized data, and we have it coming faster without human intervention. And the blockchain basically provides you the truth that the data is indeed accurate. It may be the wrong data, meaning the wrong value, but it'll be immutable and referenceable, and you can audit it. So I think that's what you're seeing in supply chain more than the hype in supply chain is you're seeing a lot of artificial intelligence attempts to move AI into supply chain. The other part of this, which I'm sure Michael's going to talk about, is the liquidity. If I have immutable data and I can have analytics running real time, I can actually start releasing funds for supply chain in transit and not just wait. And there are some very compelling businesses that are they call it a liquid supply chain. It's all financial. It's trying to start to release that. And no reasonable CFO is going to let funds leave their coffers for goods in transit if they can't rely on the data. So we can come back to that. But I think that you're seeing a lot of the noise around building block supply chain blockchain use, and you're seeing a lot of analytics that are being fed in real time.
So Benedict, if I can, Michael here, I'm gonna jump in again. So I'm gonna tee up a nice softball pitch here for Paul, because this is his passion in life. But so Netflix has a video series called, I believe, Rotten. And one of the videos in that series talks about fake honey and just how honey has, how the honey you buy is probably not real honey. It's been diluted with, corn syrup or something. And basically this fake honey has put most honey producers in the United States at a huge disadvantage, if not out of business. But blockchain is a potential solution for that. So I'll just, since Paul's a world-renowned beekeeper, I'll just let him talk about Provence honey supply chain and comment on that.
You're on mute, Paul.
You're on mute, Paul. We can't hear you.
Paul, you have to unmute.
We'll do that after Michael's presentation.
Okay. Okay, that's great.
But thanks for the layout.
Sure. So we're going to be getting into provenance now, Benedict. Also, just to chat about liquidity, the liquidity that you can get through blockchain can really be helpful to small businesses. For example, if you get into Walmart and you're a small business, like I had a food bar business, they could require you to supply all the stores in the United States. So I might have to go out and borrow literally $1 million to get all the ingredients, bake it, ship it, and if they don't like it, they don't have to pay me for 30, 60 days, depending on what their terms are. If they don't sell it, they could just send it back to me after it's expired, and that could bankrupt me because I don't have the liquidity. However, if you did have blockchain, you could say to them, well, look, I need you to give me enough money to buy the ingredients, and I can show you that I actually did buy the ingredients by putting those purchase orders on the blockchain. And then once it ships, they could pay me 50%, which is going to be basically my cost, because pretty much food is about 2 to 1 on the profit margin. So once it leaves my facility, then I can be paid right away. So now I'm at break even, and then I can wait my 30 to 60 days to be paid, and that would just be pure profit. So it would allow small players to be larger players with larger suppliers instead of incrementally working your way up the food chain. And let me just take Sandeep and Francisco really quick because I don't want to run out of time. So Sandeep, go ahead.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the couple of things the points that are being made here, that first of all, Bill said that blockchain, because it is costly, it is saving the cost, and I, not that I am not favoring. My point is that if you are going to keep some, first of all, you have to find people who can run that blockchain on their computers if it is permissionless or if it is permission. Even in that case, you are going to have thousands, if not million, copy of the same data running on multiple computers. That goes against what we talked about, that it could probably save some environment, because now, rather than having 1, 2, or 3 copies in a corporate, you are having million copies of the same data at multiple places. One thing. Second thing is that the other thing we talked about, that weather data and analytics, those are not the feature or strength that blockchain is providing you. That would come anyways, because that is the external data being dropped onto the blockchain by IoT or other devices, or maybe other companies who has, again, centralized data. Other thing is that you talked about smart contract. At times when I return some product to Amazon, the moment UPS guy scans that product, I get my refund. So it is another, again, that is not something blockchain is offering. The optics toward this thing, that blockchain, your honey or your these things, they make it look good, but we have to look at blockchain technology in absolute fashion, that what are you getting out of it. Again, the only problem there is that it is centralized under a single corporate, but again, FedEx, as Prakash said, has trust built into that. But again, blockchain is not something that is so great here by my views here.
Yeah, let me just make one comment, Sandeep. It'll be very quick, but I agree with you in the sense that that's why we need the proof points. And so only after they've done the pilot and then evaluated what it takes to go to scale, and you can see that that's less expensive, does the blockchain alternative become favorable to other traditional alternatives from a cost perspective. So I would agree with you. And what I was trying to say last time is that we're just too early in the process to have clear, hard documented proof points economically. We're in the pilot stage in most industries. So you and I agree, and we'll see where the numbers come out.
Okay, so let's talk about provenance. So taking a look at the whole supply chain, some of the advantages that we've already touched on is the retailers get to see the product coming from the grower. The producers on their own end, they can also show you exactly what they're doing, especially if people are really into local and organic and they want to make sure that stuff really is local, organic, it really is cage-free, then you can take a look at what's happening on the producer end as well as the retailer end. The shoppers love this, especially the ones that are foodies. I was in the foodie business, and they love to hit the QR code and take a look at the farmer's name, get their story, also see certifications. For example, if you do have partnerships such as certified vegan, certified organic, there's a ton of paperwork involved with this. And I happened to meet quite a few farmers who actually were organic, but they weren't certified organic because the paperwork was too daunting, expensive, and time-consuming. And they weren't technically oriented people who had a lot of time to figure it out. And this could actually help them by being able to streamline the ability to make themselves compliant. So now this is a way to track where your fish came from. There's actually a friend of mine, he owns Red's Best in Boston, and he puts a QR code on every fish that's caught. And when you hit the QR code, which you can get when you're in the restaurant, when you order that fish, it'll show you the captain of the boat, the name of the boat, whether it was caught by line or net, and then GPS coordinates of where you found it in the water. And this is to give people the aid and comfort of, yes, you actually did get some cod off of Cape Cod. Another one is digital certification for the future. A lot of these certifiers, when I was in the food business, it was really interesting that no one was able to answer the question of who is certifying the certifiers. I got my vegan certification by fax and $125. I just filled out the form and they gave me the certification, and There was no on-site visit. There was no inspection of my facility. And I kind of joked around with the lady on the other end of the phone to make sure she got my facts. I said, you know, I could be an auto mechanic and you would certify me vegan and you wouldn't know. Like, no one's checking me and who's checking you. So having this digital certification can actually be a little bit closer to finding the truth. It's not 100%. People can still commit fraud, but this does make it easier to see those certifications. This is another interesting one about fair payments. There's a lot to be said about people saying, yes, we're actually paying more to those farmers. And one of my mentors in the food business was the guy that invented organic cane sugar. And basically, he said a lot of these people who they say are being paid more money, they're in countries that don't have banks, that can't accept wires. So how could you even verify that this is true? And so by having this on the blockchain, it can possibly help create the verification that, yeah, I actually am paying my farmers a fair wage as opposed to just saying that I am. So this just adds another layer of certification. Again, people can still commit fraud with it, but it starts to add some more transparency to it. And then we already saw the video on the fashion so that you could actually take a look that, yeah, it was made in China or it was actually made in France. I just didn't sew in a label. And this one with smart labels would help you identify whether your items were made in a sweatshop or not. And then here's another way that you can pay a little bit more for your coffee by, again, getting to verify that this really is single origin coffee and it wasn't just cut with something else. So again, to Benedict's point, you know, we want to know that this is the truth, but putting this information on the blockchain can help with transparency, but people could still put fraudulent documents on the blockchain, but it does add another layer of transparency. So now this one I found interesting is that they're starting to use blockchain for ethically mined gold. And basically they're taking the same idea as the woman that put blood diamonds on the blockchain. And I have a short CNBC video to show you how he's doing this. Let's begin.
Who don't know what Emergent is all about, tell us what you do.
Well, we're a fintech company focusing in on emerging markets. And for that's us, that's Latin America, Central America, Asia Pacific, and then Africa and the Middle East. We run a payments business in all of those areas, processing for large-scale digital merchants in about 60 countries and hundreds of local payment methods. And now we're building a digital gold ecosystem on top of that payments infrastructure.
Okay, so tell me about that. What you've done is essentially digitized the gold supply chain. What problem does it solve?
Well, look, the thing about gold is that there's increasing demand for responsibly sourced gold. Now, the challenge in the gold industry is that there are standards and clear standards for conflict-free gold. But the challenge is that it's a manual process and participants have to attest to the responsible nature of the gold. So what we're doing is, and there's thousands of players in miners, refiners, vaults, transport companies, we're taking that process and creating a digital record that's continuous from one end of the supply chain to the other. That makes it easy for partners and players in the space to be able to automate that process. And at the end of the day, because it's in the blockchain, we're able to certify three things for buyers which are really critically important. One is that it's 100% responsible gold. The second is that it's 99.99% pure. And the third is we can guarantee the provenance of the gold so the buyer knows exactly what mine that gold came from.
Okay, so how does it work? I assume there's an app involved as well?
Yeah, so look, a lot of pretty sophisticated and advanced technology in this, but it has to be robust enough to be able to work in a mine environment, and these are tough physical environments. So what we've done is created a cryptographic seal which gets attached to the gold, the dory bar or or other forms of gold coming out of the mine. And then we track that at every point in the supply chain. And then by using a mobile device with NFC, you simply scan the cryptographic seal, which has a small antenna in it, and then that creates a public and a private encrypted message that goes into the blockchain. And by virtue of that, everybody in the blockchain, all the node operators, then have a consensus algorithm so that you can agree that the transaction occurred at each step in the process. And that gives you certainty, an irrefutable record, it's immutable, and it's also auditable.
Okay, so here's just a quick zip through of some blockchain startups in supply chain. But before we do that, Kevin Ellis has a hand up with his puppy.
Oh, well, I don't have my puppy with me right now, but I'm just listening to some of these gents or people being interviewed explaining how blockchain will magically validate all of the elements in the supply chain, but never addressing how they actually can stop fraud at the source. So what I'm waiting for now is there's always the social waves of, I'll call it buzzwords of, it's blockchain, it's on the blockchain, it's certified, you know, pick any kind of thing in history and people get on that buzz, and just because it has that word and explanation, they'll start to close their minds to the fact that they're just assuming then that everything about this is legitimized. So the real crooks start to employ those things, and you don't have that trust. And it takes a long time before people dig out the nasties on these things, like Cheerios, like Paul was showing, where that whole confidence level of society gets built up that this thing has actually helped them, and in fact it's just being exploited. So I really like to see how they're going to be true in enabling that. So your comment of who's certifying the certifier, who audits the auditors, and you know, there really needs to be something around really strong credibility for verification services. I think that would be a great market.
Yes, and you're going to like our end of lecture discussion because it's basically going to be exactly on what you talked about. So let me zip through these slides so that we can get to the discussion so I can hear everyone's opinions on what they think. So here's just a couple blockchain startups. Here's cloud logistics for trucking within the United States, which is going to be good for people who are going to be competing with FedEx, small truckers, whether they have one rig or maybe 5 or 10. This will allow them to provide greater customer service. One of the downsides of this is that some of the truckers are really resistant to being tracked on a mile-by-mile basis where they are. Why did you stop at that truck stop for half an hour? So there is some pushback on this level of transparency. And these are some of the industries that they get into, the typical ones: manufacturing, wholesale, retail. And one of their competitors is OpenPort.
So, Michael,
yes, sir.
can I just make a point around the truckers?
Yep.
So one of the things that when you see resistance like this, and what you're saying is exactly correct, what you have to ask is why, and the reason for it has very little to do with the documentation. It has to do with their revenue model is based on miles traveled. And so the Department of Transportation has limits on how many hours you can drive in a given day. And so what they do is they push that, because for them, the revenue per mile is their livelihood. And there's this tension between the DOT and the truckers around, making more money and driving unsafe because you're too tired. And so some of the large package carriers like Federal Express and UPS don't give you a choice. They've actually used the analytics to change your routing. So for them, believe it or not, was risk management. With UPS, no UPS route has left turns. They're all right turns. And it's actually built right into their routing. And so all of the UPS drivers are guided on right turn only routes. I just thought you'd like that fun fact. But the reason for it is actually very interesting. It's due to risk and compliance. Left-hand turns, there are blind spots for the panel vans. And they actually figured out that it was more effective for them to do right turns than left. So they don't even go a half mile out of the way to only do right turns. And the mapping software and the GPS in the UPS truck guides them. And then of course, if they don't do it, it's tracking that as well. So it's the revenue model that drives the trucking mileage issue and the DOT compliance requirement for hours driven, not miles driven. So I just wanted to bring that up. So when you start looking at these blockchain problems, it's always important to look underneath why people are doing the behavior, or why the behavior is what it is. It's usually coming from some non-technical problem like this. So.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And I'm going to share that at Thanksgiving dinner because I love my trivia. So UPS only takes right turns. I like that. So now for our next section.
Michael, I think Tucker had his hand up. I'm not sure if it's still relevant, but
his hand went down.
Oh, okay.
So now we're going to be talking about something that Accenture is doing, which is rather interesting and potentially, well, I know it's controversial, and I'm sure you're going to love this part. It's editing the blockchain. So basically, here are some of Accenture's reasons why you would want to edit a blockchain. That you may need to edit it to handle scaling over time for data storage capacity. Illegal actions, if someone does something wrong and you might need to correct it. For example, a $60 million smart contract hack on the Dow. Operational errors, I just simply typed in the wrong thing and a regulatory agency is making me correct it, such as Paul Quigley, I recorded his birth date incorrectly and that's caused a lot of problems. I have to go fix that. Permanent mischief, there's pornography and classified documents on the Bitcoin blockchain. So that might be something that isn't appropriate for a public blockchain. Regulatory concerns. The SEC and the EU, they're making up the laws as things evolve, and they may say that you need to go back and change things. So what I would like to know at this point is, what do you think of a blockchain that you can edit? So feel free to raise your hand. I'd love to hear what you think about that. David Gray.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we have to have an editable blockchain, and you know, I go back to the article that we read previously, where they, you know, sort of create this secret lock for you to enable that and still knit it together. You know, for the correct chain of authenticity.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, David. Joe Walsh.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're definitely going to need it because like it goes back to even Paul's lecture last week when he talked about how as things slowly are hooked up to the with the Internet of Things, when you start getting all this data, the one thing that I always think about is that all this data has to be correct in the first place. So hopefully when they hook all these things up, they're all like at the correct settings, they're all at, you know, everything set up, the correct firmware and everything else. Because the minute that stuff starts all putting stuff out in the blockchain, if you think about it, if it's not at the right settings or calibrated correctly, all that data out there is just going to be junk and it's just going to corrupt it to begin with. And most of the stuff that you put in before it goes in service, you find out is you have to do a lot of work to even get it in service or anything. Like nothing's ever really, you know, set up correctly when you first get it. It's always going to require that. And then also once it goes in service, it's always going to be out of calibration. You're always going to have to maintain it to make sure it's in that. So I think, you know, to correct it eventually, you're going to need that.
Interesting. So before I call on the other people with their hands up, I'd like to do a quick poll. So if you pull up the participant box and find the yes and no button, please vote. Yes, you think that we should be able to edit the blockchain, or no, we should not be able to edit the blockchain. And while you're voting, Greg, what do you think?
Well, I kind of agree with David and Joe. I think at some point we need to consider that no matter what we're doing, blockchain will still be managed by a human being who will be making errors and mistakes. So to say that 100% of the time the information provided will be accurate is not realistic compared to the fact that human beings are making errors. So to say that we're going to editable version of it, it's definitely one of the good way to bring it in a more understandable way for people to see what's the advantage of having that sort of technology.
Okay, thank you. Interestingly enough, we have quite a split vote. We have 10 yeses to edit and 9 not to edit it. Josh, what do you think?
I was going to say that early on with this, I was sort of on the fence, and especially when we were reading, I think in the first book, the perspective between the purists and the fact that we're human, and especially with the cases with the lawyers and whatnot. And I would think that I'm trying to remember the terminology for, not fork, but I think it was called a chameleon feature, something called the chameleon. It was a fork, but I think if we're going to have this ability, we probably need this ability, that it would be done in a way that doesn't cover up the fix, so that at least we can go back and look and see the error and see that the error was corrected, rather than just sort of an artifact that shows that, ooh, somewhere in here someone has sliced in. And because if you can't see that an error was fixed, then you might assume that there was a form of a hack. Am I making any sense?
So you're suggesting like an amendment feature where we could see the error and then the amendment, the correction?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand the technology behind when we read about the chameleon, but it seemed to me that they were trying to express that this is a way to, rather than the drastic measure of a fork, this is a way to repair an error, but done so in a way that everyone gets to see the correction rather than just covering up the correction.
Okay, so put your hands down if they're raised if you agree to edit. I want to hear from someone who doesn't agree with editing. So I want to hear from someone who doesn't want it to be edited. Cheng, is that your point of view?
Yeah, so I mean, I just wrote it in chat too, but it's like having a database. I mean, you have an audit trail of all changes that were done to the data. So I don't see why you would want to edit specific entries in the blockchain when you can just have, I don't know if we call it a specialized blockchain or maybe a special entry in the blockchain that says entry number, the previous entry was an error. It should be $100 and not $10, for example.
Okay.
And
Yeah, so Cheng,
and that kind of goes in with what Josh was saying. You have, at least you have some record that there was an error, and this is the correcting error, so that everybody can, and everybody would still see that.
right. So Cheng, I think that's a great idea in the sense that you maintain transparency, right?
Perfect. Yeah,
And,
exactly.
and,
on the blockchain.
Right, and so you write an erase record and you write a new record to replace it, or something like that, as you just said.
No,
exactly.
I disagree for the reason that, and Cheng, I think you're on the right track, but the issue is time. And so if I can edit an original entry, then I've effectively erased the original, even if it's wrong, I've erased the original entry and I've replaced it in a different time date sequence than everything that follows it. And so if I append, so if I recognize the mistake, I strike it through and then append it or update the record, then I've maintained integrity of the chain or the data stream. Forget the chain because that gets confusing. But I've maintained the integrity of the data stream and I've corrected the value, which I think is where the human piece comes in, where you said, like, if I key in $10,000 instead of $1,000, I want to be able to know, it's not that which value is correct.
I mean that's perfectly reasonable too, but I don't see where you mean. I don't see what you mean about the time factor, because wouldn't you still need to get consensus or whatever consensus algorithm from all of the participants, or at least maybe a majority of participants to make that change, as well as adding to the blockchain?
Yeah.
Or Cheng, one of the things that might happen is there's an adjudication process between when the first entry was written and when the second entry was written. And so sometimes time, Paul, you're right. Time would be, I just entered it wrong and I want to change it now, but I realized that right after I entered it. That's one scenario. But then there's another use case that said, I entered it, there's an adjudication process, and now, we've all agreed, or whoever the adjudicator is, and all the parties have agreed that it was entered wrong. So then what do you do? And Cheng, that's where I think your example might work, right? Or because time would have passed.
Well, and so, in anyone who's worked with financial systems, you can if you're working in a financial system and you make an error and you correct the error, it drops to an audit log that's journaled. I mean, and I think the difference with all of this blockchain-based data capture is what we didn't have 10 years ago that we have now, good or bad, is this date timestamp in its relevance to the data. Because even when we were working with large ERP systems or other basically spreadsheet model systems, what we didn't have dimensionally was time. And so I think that's the big value proposition shift with all these systems, whether it's supply chain, financial services, or otherwise, the dimensionality of time.
Okay.
Good point. Good point.
Can I add a quick comment? Being kind of having worked, I work at Accenture, and I'm familiar with David Treat, who's the main architect of this invention. And to a couple points that people made, a feature of this invention within Accenture is that it leaves a scar every time a change is made. So it's still temper evident. It is kind of auditable. It has a component where all parties involved need to agree that this change needs to be done. And it's kind of for break glass moments, if you will. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, thank you. So now let's do a quick vote. We're not going to have comments. I'm going to have comments in the next slide. So just vote yes or no. Would you use blockchain for supply chain? Yes or no? We'll just do a quick vote and I'll announce. Okay, we've got 23 yeses and 1 no. Excellent. Next vote. Do you need blockchain for supply chain? Yes or no? Do you need it? Ooh, interesting. 6 yeses and 15 no's. Okay, thank you very much. So it's a nice to have, but not a need to have, according to the class. So now, let's talk about the pros and cons of blockchain. So take a look at these. I'm curious, what do you think? What are some of the cons of this? How could blockchain influence legal issues? How are you going to handle it with contraband? What about bribing? Do bribes go away? Are bribes still there? So feel free to raise a hand and share with me the pros and cons of blockchain and supply chains. This is just open comments.
Hey Michael.
Yes, sir.
Can you, would you consider reframing the question around the value of supply chain and split it into perishable goods and other hard goods?
We could take another vote. You want to frame the question, Paul, and we'll vote again?
Yeah, so the question is, do you see value in the supply chain for perishables? Answer that question.
Do you see, so yes, if you see the value for perishables, and no if you don't?
And some want I don't know. They want I don't know on it, Michael.
No, this is a binary world, Bill. We can only do yes or no.
Okay. Well, we have critical thinking students in this class, so I think I don't know might also work for a critical thinker.
Here's how we can do that for you, Bill. That we have 9 yeses, 1 no, and out of 34 people, we can just do the math and see all the abstentions that we have. Minus me, Paul, Bill, and Satoshi's in the room. So take out 4. So we have 30 people voting. So right now the final vote is 10 yeses, 1 no. And
okay,
your next question.
The next question is on durable goods supply chain.
Okay, so let me just clear this out here. So let's vote again. Yes for blockchain for durable goods, or no. And we've got 12 yeses and 4 no's. Now it's 14 yeses, 3 no's, 13 and 3. People are changing their votes based on everyone else's vote.
So what's really interesting is both of those surveys, the last 2, contradict the original one, which is the value of the supply chain, the value in supply chain.
Interesting point. Joe Hines, what do you think?
I was going to mention just kind of how the only reason a company would really want to move to a supply chain blockchain solution would be if they really had a supply chain problem. So it would really come out to outweighing the cost of implementation versus the cost that they're losing in regards to their supply chain. So I think if you were losing millions of dollars a year, it might be worth hiring engineers and implementing RFID tags and having those be tracked with your whatever your blockchain solution that you've invested your time in. But I really think if you're only losing $50,000 a year, that's like less than even the salary for an engineer. So I don't really see companies having a whole lot of incentive just yet to move in that direction.
Okay, and Francisco, I wasn't able to call on you last time, so how about you go now and then Tucker?
No worries. So a different point to what Joe was just talking about. When you think of supply chain for blockchain for supply chain, I think of pharma. Pharma is an industry that loses maybe millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on illegitimate and what's called APIs or active pharmaceutical components. If one of those components goes wrong, whether it be temperature-wise or it's exposed to certain elements for too long, it can cause serious problems to the manufacturing of a drug. So I think blockchain has huge potential of fixing and giving the accountability that's needed to make sure that a drug's working properly and that's being sold for consumers is actually working properly.
That's sort of to Paul's point that if you look at this as perishable, you have to maintain the integrity of the product as you're going along.
But just, Francisco, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, actually, I think many retailers would want to adopt blockchain because there are many fraudulent products in the market, watches, Gucci bags, etc., and they're losing billions of dollars. These are billions of dollars in lost revenue from counterfeit goods.
And Tucker, your hand went down. Did you still want to say something, Tucker?
No, I've been made redundant. Just a very trivial point by comparison. I keep getting made redundant. I keep getting knocked out of the queue here. I'm sorry. I was just going to say somebody had suggested that the results of our two polls were completely different. I was just going to chime in and say the first poll was asking whether supply chain or whether blockchain was critical or necessary for supply chain, and the second poll was inquiring whether it was desirable. Hence the differing results. I just wanted to call it because I didn't know where to vote because the question was being posed a different way. That's all. I'm checking back out now, but thank you.
Great, thank you, Tucker. And Bill, can I do a time check with you? It's 8:44 and we have 4 more hands up.
Yeah, why don't we run the hands and then we probably need to go to the student-led discussions. Tucker, that's called critical thinking.
Yeah, Tucker, thanks for keeping us in line.
Thank you, Tucker. John Stock, you're on the air.
Yeah, so one of the kind of cons that I see, not just for this in supply chain, but kind of across the boards in a lot of these blockchain applications is it seems like it's really hard to just do incremental things. It seems like you really need to have a full sort of like every party in the mix has to be involved in order for it to really work. If you just adopted, some elements of it, I think you have that opportunity for, all of the negative stuff with, bribes and counterfeits and all of these other things in the mix.
Okay, so one fax machine will not do it. Kirtana, I saw your hand up there.
Yep. So I think blockchain has a lot of potential with supply chain. One of the biggest reasons I think that is because, and I mentioned this in the chat, is because today the only way we can ascertain quality in some cases is the price and all of the labeling on the goods. So I think blockchain would essentially put all of these products on the same plane and sort of let the local farmer be playing at the same level as a big corporate. And I think that's really important for the end consumer.
Thank you, Kirtana. Joe Walsh.
Yeah, Bill, I just wanted to chime in on a point that you said. I took another class at Harvard, and the professor actually, he did a lot in like fashion merchandising and everything else like that in terms of the manufacturing of it. And what he actually said is that the majority of these goods that you would consider counterfeit are actually not counterfeit. They're actually failed goods that couldn't pass the quality control or quality assurance of a lot of the brand names. And what ends up happening is they get rejected, and then all of a sudden they disappear. So then instead of being destroyed, so a lot of times there might be, employees and everything else selling these goods on the outside. But I guess at that point, it goes back to the beginning of, well, whether those goods would ever be made on the blockchain in the beginning, and the fraud to actually, say, hey, this is a good that was rejected for quality assurance, or whether that actually get in and would get into the supply chain. So I just wanted to bring that up. So sometimes those things they're not necessarily counterfeit. They're actually just bad goods from the manufacturer.
They're secondhand goods, so to speak, that were rejected. Yeah, I'm not that deep into the consumer products, but from what I've read, there's a lot of money lost in counterfeit goods, and I know it's true in the pharma supply chain. Medications that are counterfeit, fake, or whatnot. So, but I don't know in the consumer products.
And last comment is David Gray.
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's important in supply chain for three main reasons. One is food safety. Another is, I think there's a lot of customer value that's locked up in customer not knowing, again, to all the other points about sourcing. And then ethical suppliers. In my company, we deal with so many suppliers. It's very difficult, believe it or not, to track and deny suppliers that have caused problems in the past, because all they have to do is change the name of their company, and maybe open up a plant in a neighboring region or whatever, and they walk right in the front door again. So, and believe it or not, it really comes down to location and identifying that very clearly.
Oh, interesting. Well, thank you, David. And thank you, Joe, for telling me where I can shop for less next time. Okay, that is the end of my portion of class. I'm going to hand this back to Bill to